Okay, I guess I gotta do that again. So, we're gonna look into inflation today. So, as you all know, is the rate at which the prices of goods and services are rising, so leading to a decrease in purchasing power over a period of time. So, and as I said, is a key indicator when it comes to overall economy and individual businesses. So today we're gonna look how inflation affect the economy and our businesses. So Yodi will be presenting today for us about inflation. What is inflation? How does it, the impact of inflation on economy and individual businesses. So Yodi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ken. I really do appreciate it. It was a nice introduction, as always. So hello, everyone. Happy Monday for all of you. And for those of you who are in Europe or in the eastern side of like us, happy Tuesday because it's 12 a.m. here. Today, I'm going to presenting about what is inflation. So the reason why we talked about inflation today is because last period we talked about payback period, or also DCF and also the ARR, if you guys remember. So that actually measures if our investment is it worth it, right? So if you put today $1,000, tomorrow how long it takes for you to get payback. Also, like if your investment today will be worth for tomorrow your return. So today we're going to talk about inflation. Why we are talking about inflation is, as Ken explained in the introduction, inflation affects our purchasing power parity, different things in the country. So let's start. What's inflation? So inflation is the long-term increase in the price of service and goods due to devaluation of currency. So when a currency is devaluated, that's actually impact of inflation. So what happened when your currency devaluated? So the purchasing parity will go down. So let's say you have today US dollar and you have yen in the other currency. So if yen is being devaluated against dollar, which is the purchasing power parity, will be also reduced. So when we compare two currencies, if you want to purchase as an exporting, business perspective, if it is like, for instance, or let's say importing perspective, let's mention importing. If your currency has, no value to purchase items from, outside, it affects, even the market inside. So it affects the general economy of the country, also in the world as well. Even though inflation is a bad thing, also it might be good thing to entrepreneurs. This is actually, I see it as exporting perspective. For instance, let's mention Ethiopia, because I'm from Ethiopia. When we see the coffee business, the problem in Ethiopia is the currency is devaluated very, very, very much. But it doesn't look like we have devaluated currency. Because when you see the exchange rate of one Ethiopian currency against dollar, it's 50 Ethiopian birr against $2. But the thing is, we have got two exchange rate in the country, which means we have a black market exchange rate and also we have a bank level exchange rate. So as an exporter, if I want to export coffee, let's say, then, this is what I have been studying for a longer time, why the export, sector is being affected because of currency. Like, if you want to export coffee today, you will see it in two different exchange rate perspective. One is a bank perspective and the other one is the black market perspective. So if you see the bank perspective, you're getting lower money than the black market exchange. Let's say if you sell 1 kilogram of coffee today at $3, so and also the bank is giving you at $51 against your Ethiopian birr if it's 50, so you're getting 150. But in black market, you can double or triple your money. But the thing is, when you do export sector, mostly in Ethiopia, the national or the central bank is controlling that. So if you are a coffee exporter, And if you have a buyer of your coffee, so the national bank is in between for you guys to make a deal. So this also another impact on the export sector. But if it is, devaluating healthier, which means as like only we have one exchange rate in the country, that would be a good thing for the entrepreneur, as the slide shows. Usually, a high inflation rate problems arise when the unexpected increase occurs. When there is, unexpected increase on goods and services, inflation occurs. If income doesn't increase as inflation increases, everyone's purchasing power parity or power will be effectively reduced, which in turn leads to stagnant or a slow economy. This is what we are saying. If inflation rate is increasing, your income must be increasing, because otherwise it will affect your purchasing power. It could be rent, utility, anything. In other words, inflation, as mentioned, essentially how much the dollar is worth at a given moment with regards to purchasing. The idea behind inflation being a force for good in that economy is manageable. Enough rate can support economic growth without devaluing the currency so much that becomes nearly worthless. So if we can mention one currency in Africa, I think Zimbabwe, if I'm not mistaken, their currency is very, very devalued. It's like nothing. So if our currency in a country is devalued that much, it's actually affecting the economy so high, because even though if inflation or devaluing currency is good as some perspective, but in the other way, if our currency is devaluing a lot, it also affects the country economy. Also, inflation is a quantitative measure of rate at which the average price level of basket selected goods and services in economy increases over period of time. So we can actually measure in inflation. It could be also a quantitative measure rate to measure the selected good and service in economy. Does that increase over a period of time? It could be also a measure. Often expressed as a percentage, we express inflation in percentage. Inflation indicates decreasing in the purchasing power parity of nation or currency. So inflation actually indicates purchasing power parity, decreasing purchasing power parity in national, currency. Why does inflation occur? So we have the first reason, which is called the demand pull inflation. Does inflation occur when aggregate demand? So what's aggregate demand? There is demand and also there is aggregate demand. So when we say demand, we are saying demand in microeconomics perspective, which is individual demand. But when we say aggregate demand perspective, we are talking about macroeconomics, which is the national. So demand, sorry, Maura, can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. I have to mute this person.
Make me co-host. I can mute the room.
I muted actually. So demand pull inflation occurs when the aggregate demand for goods and services in an economy rises more rapidly than economy productive capacity. So we are looking at inflation in macroeconomics level, not micro. So that's why we're talking about aggregate demand for goods. So if we have a high aggregate demand for goods and services in an economy, arises more rapidly than an economy productive capacity. So if we don't have aggregate supply, and if the aggregate demand is higher, the demand pull inflation occurs at that time. One potential shock to aggregate demand might come from a central bank that rapidly increasing the supply of money. So if the central bank keeps printing money as well, that, that actually really affects the demand. Potentially, it's a shock. So in economics perspective, we don't recommend printing money, because even if inflation occurs, we have different policies that we can follow, like physical policy called monetary physical policy and contractionary physical policy. So depending on your inflation rate, if your inflation is lower or if there is no money in the demand, so what kind of policy should we apply? We call that, could be expansionary. Expansionary is giving out the money to the market. Now we have also contractionary system. Contractionary system the government will just buy anything, bond, like just to take out the money from the market. So in that level, like if it is expansionary, the interest rates are going to be lower, so you can actually take any loan you want because they want the money in the market. But if it's contractionary system, the interest increase is higher, so you don't take out any money from the bank. So you keep your money in the bank. So there are different methods that actually, fix the inflation instead of, a supply or printing money, increasing the supply of money. So everyone knows that the national debt is bad thing. However, did you know that over time it can cause high inflation rate? If the national debt increases, the country has two options. The first thing is raise tax or print more money to pay off the debt. If taxes are increased, business will react by increasing price and goods or services. The latter will automatically lead to an increased inflation as discussed above. So raising tax also has its own impact on the business, because if we raise tax, price of goods and services also will be increasing. Also, if we print money, it has also another effect. We don't recommend printing money because it will have also devaluation effect on the currency. So like we recommend to apply different policies in terms of the inflation rate, like according to if we're trying to gather the money in, we can apply contractionary method, or if you want to apply the money like in the market, if you want the money to be in the market, you can actually apply the expansionary policy in the market. So the other thing we can look at is exchange rate. If a country increases the exposure to foreign marketplace, its inflation will become worse. And also the other thing we have is cost push effective. We talked about demand pull inflation, then we have exchange rate here, and also cost push effective. This is an economic theory that tries to explain what drives up the price of goods, the consumer goods and services. So cost push effect actually study or explain what is the reason, what drives up the price of consumer and goods and services. This theory states that when a company is faced with an increased input cost like raw materials, they will retain their profitability by passing this increased cost of production onto consumers in the form of higher prices. So if our input cost, like raw material, could be any construction raw material, or we're trying to produce some bottle of water. So if your input or if your raw material cost is higher, so how the business, trying to avoid that cost onto the match by making the output very expensive. So in the market, to purchase a bottle of water will be expensive because I'm purchasing the input as a higher price. So this is what cost push effective are studying here. So now the next thing is types of inflation. There are many different types of inflation, depending not on what is good being priced, but what the inflation rate actually is. For example, what happens if inflation rate is well above or the failed or intended target at a higher rate, yet still is a single digit, that known as a walking inflation. It's seen as a concern yet and manageable. So that we have here three types of major inflation. The first one is demand pull inflation. We talked about it, which is inflation from higher demand for goods and low unemployment. This is the indication of having a demand pull inflation. The other one is cost push inflation. Cost push inflation is inflation caused by sudden decrease in the supply of goods, which would increase good prices, and also producer for this good will increase the cost, could then pass this on the consumer in the form of increased price. So when we have a sudden decrease in the supply of good, then which would the good price will be increased, because producers also want to produce more, then they will increase the cost to cover whatever their costs on the production. The other one is like anticipated. This is price rise because people expect them to rise. So if you expect something to rise and people have the expectation, this good will be a rise, that's also an anticipated inflation, the third one. So how is inflation is measured? The other one is, how can you measure inflation as a single number when so many different goods and services exist? It's not easy. The US government has a couple of different methods for calculating the current inflation rate. The first one we use is consumer price index. So effects of inflation, how does it affect you? The impact of inflation affects many different groups when it hits. Not every group is affected the same way. Who benefits from inflation and who doesn't? So when inflation occurs, it could affect the lender, as a money, for instance, if you want to borrow, and the lender and also the borrower. It will affect the lender, might also benefit the borrower. So we'll see in the below. Generally, in a period mild inflation, job seekers can benefit because increased spending can mean increased demand, and companies may decide to hire new employees to better manage the new demand. If you have borrowed money from a lender, inflation could be convenient for you, with the currency devalued. What you borrowed a year or 2 years ago is now the equivalent to a lower amount of money. So inflation also, as if you want to borrow money and if you borrowed this money 1 year or 2 years ago, having inflation will help you to pay lower money than, in terms of, because today's $100 is not tomorrow is not the same with tomorrow's $100. It will be different because of inflation. In this assumed manageable level of inflation, business that sells goods and services can benefit as well. A healthy amount of inflation is said to increase and incentivize spending more at its best. That can work in a way that the increased costs are offset by an increase in sales. Unhealthy or unmanageable level, however, this is a disaster for nearly everyone. If inflation spirals out of control, people lose faith in their currency. That's what's happening in Zimbabwe and a lot of African countries, because they don't have faith in their currency, because they are very, admire the US dollar because of the value. Financial institutions suffers as the people pull their money out of them. Business suffer as their goods become too expensive for most people. This is also another problem. It affects the housing sector. As I'm studying housing sector at this time, this inflation is affecting how many people can afford to rent a good house because of inflation. How many people can afford to buy a house because of inflation? So it affects the business, provider, for entrepreneurs to sell their good because it's becoming more expensive for people to afford it. And in the other hand, people are actually pulling out their money because if you put your money in the bank, it's devaluing every time. So what happened is, let me give you an example. I think 1 month ago, I wanted to send the money back home. I sent the money and I regret sending the money because the thing I wanted to purchase, I couldn't find it on time. So over time, in this 2 months, I could say to you, I lost maybe, a quarter of the money I sent because of inflation in devalued currency. Those with low incomes and fixed incomes suffer in any level of inflation. So those people who has low income and also fixed income will suffer if the inflation is any level, if it is mild, high, they will be affected with the inflation. The value of currency goes down, but income have not necessarily risen. If someone's yearly income is only $25,000 and the inflation rate from 1 year to the next year is 2%, that salary is now equivalent to $24,500 was a year prior. Inflation has a major effect on the entire country's economy. It impacts not only the government, but little things in the average person's or daily lives. Both a cause and effects of how the economy is doing. Inflation has both its fans and dictators. Many think that certain amount of inflation are good for thriving economy, but the larger rate raises concerns. It can devalue the currency and significantly, and at worst has been a key component to a recession. So recession season is there is 5 types of, also we can talk about boom, recessions, those peaks, high level of economy, we call it boom. Then the recession is the last part of, your economy. So when the currency is devalued, it shows that the key point of, the recession. Maybe I'll provide the graph for next session. Effects of inflation. Rising price, known as inflation, impacts cost of living, the cost of doing business, borrowing money, mortgage, corporate and government bond yields, and every other factor of the economy. Inflation can be both beneficial to economic recovery and in some cases negative. So inflation, as we talk about, also could be beneficial to recover the economy. There is a recession point, then we can recover the economy to go to boom or peak. So it also has a positive effect on this perspective. How does inflation affect companies? When a price rises for energy, food, commodities, and other goods and services, the entire economy is affected. Rising prices, known as inflation, impact the cost of living, the cost of doing business, borrowing money, again, mortgage, corporate and government bond yields, and every other factor of the economy. Impact of inflation on business. A small increase in inflation can hurt the capital expenditure and increase the cost of production in a company. However, when controlled, inflation can act as a healthier stimulus for the economy. Larger corporations can handle the effects of inflation, while small firms often take a direct hit. High inflation rate can also have an adverse impact on the currency exchange rates, which will eventually result in export slump. How to deflate inflation? This is what we're talking about, how we can deflate the inflation. To entrepreneurs, beating inflation is very easy. If inflation stays for a longer period than expected in the market, you are more likely to notice this. If you didn't plan for it, you might realize that your savings are not enough to enable you to reach your goals. So let's talk about how this inflation affects business. We talked about the other day when we do our DCF calculation, payback period, and all of that. So when we choose the right valuation method for our company or for our investments, what are we saying? We were saying that does this method includes inflation, because inflation is very important. For instance, if you're trying to take a loan for or finance your project, are you measuring the inflation rate for tomorrow? Because if you expect today, if you are measuring your financing method as today, to probably the inflation rate is 2%. So you are measuring or you are asking for a loan on today's money. But is that enough to finance your project for 5 years? No, it might not in inflation perspective, because it's devaluing your currency, so you might need more financing in the project. That's what we talked about the other day. What do you mean by hyperinflation? So the definition of hyperinflation is a rapid and often uncontrollable currency devaluation causing the price of goods and services to skyrocket in a short period of time. So hyperinflation is the last inflation, and it's very bad because it's just put the price in goods like in a short period, as the slide said, in a skyrocket. Why is hyperinflation is bad? In economics, how hyperinflation is very high and typical accelerated inflation. It quickly erodes the real value of the local currency as the price of all goods and services increase. This causes people to minimize their holding in that currency, as they usually switch to more stable foreign currencies, open the US dollars. This is what happened because people will prefer buying more properties or also changing their money, keeping their money, as I prefer right now at this moment to keep my money in US dollar rather than my own local currency, because this inflation is affecting our currency. So here also we have an example of inflation. By 2014, Venezuela had entered an economic recession, and by 2016, the country had an inflation rate of 800%, the highest in its history. The International Monetary Fund expects inflation in Venezuela to be 1 million, like 1 million% for 2018. This was the actually example they were giving when they were doing the study for 2018. This, study has been done on 2016. their inflation has been the largest in the world for the past 3 years, which means on 2016, and like when we deduct 3 years from 2013 up to 2016, both political economic reasons are cause of rapid acceleration of inflation in Venezuela. On the political front, shortage of food, medicine, electricity, and other necessities are causing the rise and political instability. Hyperinflation starts when a country or government begins printing money. We talked about this also in previous time. Printing money is not a good thing because it puts the economy in hyperinflation. That's why we're not recommending printing money. Instead, it's better to apply different policy like contractionary and expansionary method. As it increases the money supply, price rises and regular inflation. An increase in the money supply is one of two causes of inflation. This excessive demand aggravates inflation. So when we conclude here, the relationship between inflation and entrepreneurship, this is a long traditional of linking entrepreneurship to economic growth. When entrepreneurship is driving a force for long-run economic growth, inflation can increase growth while its impact on output at a given productive level. So here with this part, trying to talk about the cost push effects, because when there is high inflation, the inputs will be higher, then the output also will be very expensive. So the purchasing power parity again will be affected because people cannot purchase it. The currency is devalued. So I think on this slide we talked about it already. So there's nothing more to go. I will just give to you guys to talk or to ask any questions. Thank you. Well, anyone?
Ted. Jordi, that was a brilliant summary and a brilliant explanation.
Thank you, Maura.
Very, very easy, very simple, very concise. Yeah, it's great, really good. I love that that whole thing, that whole document, and it really kind of, what we know, but sometimes we don't bring it all together. That kind of brought it all together for me about inflation.
Yeah.
It helps to understand. It helps to understand the economy because inflation is huge. And I just put in all the elements there that kind of reminded me of things that I kind of knew, but maybe not fully. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, exactly. We don't consider as individual perspective. We don't consider inflation as any impact on our daily usage, or it could be any investment. But it's a good thing to consider it because of course it affects. Anyone? Guys, please participate because I would love to hear from other people as well, because I feel like we are on the same page and you guys will be following. So when you chime in like Maura, it would be great because so we know you guys are in the same page with us. So do you want to say something? Are you on a call? Yeah, I see you though. Okay, then if there's no question, Ken, do you want to add more onto this? I'll give it to Ken.
Well, that was a brilliant presentation, and inflation is something everyone is aware of, and that impact our day to day. business or individual activity. So I believe this just give us more broad knowledge about what is really behind it, inflation. So I don't really have much I want to add because it's something we're used to. So only one thing I just want to say is regarding our ebook that is coming. So I believe that should be ready before the end of this month. So by the time we launch it, we're gonna let you know where to get it on Amazon Kindle. So we'll let you know about that. So that's all.
Can you explain about that ebook, because we have new people on the call, so they might not be aware of that.
Okay. The ebook is about digital marketing and how you can actually start with low fees to start a small digital business online. But maybe you want to sell a product. How can you, start, how to advertise, how to have your own store? If you want to go for Shopify store, how do you, create your own store, or how do you get a ready-made store? So, and how to advertise with low fees, how to run your ads. And if you want to go with, if you want to have your own website store, so how do you minimize spending more than unnecessary amounts? So the ebook is gonna include show more of practical. You're gonna have a link to a webinar, like a YouTube or something, that will explain how to that will guide you on the process. It's gonna show you how to do it. It's something you should be able to do. You should be able to do on your own, and it's gonna help you a lot. So we are still working on it. We wanna make it more simpler and more explanatory. So we're working on that, and that should be ready before the end of this, month. So by the time it's ready to be purchased, so we're gonna announce, and you can share it with your friends. They can go on Amazon Kindle and get it. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, again, thank you so much. So if you guys don't have any question, we will end today's class here. Thank you so much for attending. We'll be seeing you in next session. I don't know. Is it gonna be a holiday next? I think it's 18, right?
It's 18. I think we're gonna have probably the last class, or
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, not on the 25, of course. We're gonna have the class on the 18. I guess it's gonna be
on the 18. We're gonna have the class on the 18, but 25 no. So yeah.
Sure, we should talk about the Christmas.
How to celebrate Christmas.
Yeah.
In a dynamic way. Thank you guys for showing up today.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.